In addition to being awesome, the Alchemy material library unlocks some sweet new features for ZeroBrush users if you own the full version of ZeroBrush. So if I press T to bring up my tool shelf and property shelf here in Sensei Format, that will display my ZeroBrush menu. So ZeroBrush is awesome in that, well, it's awesome. It does a lot of sweet stuff. But one of its core features is that it allows you to instantly paint anything, whether or not it has a UV map or related images or whatever. So if I wanted to start painting this monkey head, I could just press the ZeroBrush button. And all the assets are generated, so I can just start painting. I could say add a bump layer, whatever. And any material I create with ZeroBrush, I can instantly switch back and forth between cycles. So this is super cool for UV mapped image-based materials that use, actual images for bump maps, specular, normal maps, and that kind of stuff. The one thing ZeroBrush has not been great about up until now is being able to add all these sweet layer types to pre-existing materials, in particular like really complex procedurally generated materials or basically any material. However, if you have purchased the Alchemy Material Library add-on, if you press Q to access your ZeroBrush options, or you can of course get to that menu here or here, it's kind of like hidden all over the place in ZeroBrush. Go under ZB options here, you'll notice a new menu item pop up called Alchemy Paint. And when this is check marked, this will allow you to apply all except for this add transparent layer type layers to any Blender Render or Cycles material, no matter how complex or crazy it is, and still requires zero UV mapping, zero prep work or pre-knowledge or whatever. So I'm going to quickly demonstrate what this is all about in Blender Render and Cycles. So I'm going to go press File and New and reload Startup File. And let's demonstrate this in Blender Render first and then Cycles. Okay, so I know everyone is sick and tired of seeing things done to that Suzanne head. So I'm going to click on my Models folder and click my Assets button here in Sensei Format. So I've got this armchair. This is actually a bunch of models I started creating when I began designing Alchemy, because I came to the conclusion, if I'm going to make a material library, I should probably have some stuff for the materials to go on. And I'm just going to drag this out into the 3D view here. So this is kind of like a classic kind of armchair deal I modeled here in Blender. Okay, so let's put some things on it. So I'm going to click on my Material tab. If I open up my library right now, I'll get this message. It says no Blender Render materials found. This is because the Alchemy library will automatically only display a library's Blender Render materials while in Blender Render and Cycles materials while in Cycles Render. It's a very nice feature. The Alchemy base pack, which ships with Alchemy, is composed of entirely Cycles materials. However, this open source pack, which you can download free by clicking the link over here on the Alchemy information page, has 50 Blender Render materials and 25 cycles. So we've actually got some materials that show up while we're in Blender Render here. I'll close that up. I've actually added categories to this open source pack, so we could click on our reality palettes and select from something in fabric. Oh, there's only two things here. How about this leather one? What does that look like? You can drag this open, maybe get a little better view. Oh, that's pretty nice. Looks all right. Oh, maybe like a black leather seat here. Let's go ahead and shift select all the parts that should have leather. And I'll press use. Oh, that's looking pretty good. So if we were to press Shift Z right now here in Blender Render, actually, that's not bad. Man, Blender Render takes a lot of crap, but there's some cool materials that have been made for it. Anyway, that's sidetracked. Anyway, so the point is, if with ZeroBrush, if you have this Alchemy Paint option checkmarked, which go ahead and click it so it'll be active, then rather than overwriting the material with a new ZeroBrush material, which is what will happen unless the object had no material or the material already was using a UV image texture, in which case it would be absorbed and modified into the ZeroBrush system basically. But if it's something complex like this, for either Blender Render or Cycles, it basically would overwrite it. But now, rather than overwriting it, we can select an object, say the back of this chair here, and when we press the ZeroBrush Paint button, rather than overwriting this material, we can now paint directly onto it. So we could paint this regular color layer here, so do something like that. So if I press Shift Z, you go into Render Preview, you can actually see this color being painted right onto this leather, which is super cool. And we could like add a bump layer. Now I'm just painting with bump here. Could hold shift to erase as I like to do in ZeroBrush, and press shift Z again. And you can see where I laid down this bump stuff on top of this, which is super cool. So we've done no UV mapping, no setup, nothing, and we can just go straight to work in doing sweet stuff with this material. Of course, we could add layers like glow, which emits light, specular. We can even add an alpha mask, which lets us paint where we want things to disappear, which is cool. We could load a brush, such as that from the Seamless Elemental Brush Pack you can get at blendersensei.com. So I could click brush here and click on my brushes, and this is the Seamless Elemental Brush Pack here. Click on thumbnail view, and so I mean, I don't know, I can't think of anything immediately like that makes sense for this, but maybe this like fabric knitted shawl or whatever. And click on the color layer, and you know, just paint stuff onto it. Maybe decrease the size of that. Who knows? You know, whatever your reason is for painting stuff onto stuff. But then, you know, that is painted right on to that Blender render material, which is super sweet. Of course, we can control the way it blends, so maybe change it to like overlay. Oh, it sort of disappears there. That's not great. And what about screen? There we go. Change its opacity. Maybe it's not just like barely there on that thing. That's kind of cool. We could increase its bump value of that color layer. Whoa, that's that's a bit intense. Okay, anyway, you get the idea. So this is very, very useful in adding touches to your otherwise complex materials. One of my favorite things about ZeroBrush is the brush loading options. So we could switch this to load as decal, and this will load brushes as basically things we can stamp. And what I like to do sometimes is get on Google Images, so and click on Images here and type in transparent PNG. There's a bunch of junk here. Let's not get sued by Disney. Let's get sued by whoever makes Vampire Hunter D, because that's one of my favorite animes. And so I could get this sweet D, press View Image. I'll just save this into my decals folder, in my Blender stuff, library, utilities, brushes, decals folder. Here's some junk, and we'll just call this D, I suppose. And so back in Blender, if I wanted to load this decal brush, I could press brush. And I've got this bookmarked here, which you can press this to add any folder you happen to be in Blender to your bookmarks, which is nice. Click on decals and load this D. And with the decal brush feature, it basically puts a parameter perfectly around whatever the image you loaded so that none of it's cut off, so you can always know that the full thing will go on there. And it also sets up the proper ratio with the texture scale to ensure that it's the exact ratio of the image size that was loaded. So I can just place D wherever, which is looking a little nuts because the bump value is so high. Let's turn that down to 0. And like put D on the side. And this is set to screen, so it's really dark too. Oh no, it's really dark because the layer opacity is down. Bring that back up to 1. Anyway, so it's pretty fun. Let's do a cycles demonstration. All right, just to make things nice and tidy, I'm going to go ahead and press File, New, Reload Startup File. And I think I'll use that same chair again. Bring it on into here. Which, of course, in Sensei Format with the Assets library, dragging something out into the 3D view is default Blender behavior. It will just load that file. But you can add any asset if you don't want to like overwrite the whole thing. So say I wanted to add this bottle here. I can use the 3D cursor to decide where I want something. So say over here, I click on the bottle, I press append, and then it is instead added to the scene. So that's kind of one of the uses of the Sensei Format Assets library, which is totally free. So you should check that out if you're interested. And anyway, I don't need that, so I'm going to press X to delete it and close that up. Okay, so let's switch to cycles because we're going to do a cycles demonstration of the new Alchemy paint feature nestled in the ZeroBrush options here. Let's go ahead and turn that on. Alright, so I had genuinely forgotten that that leather material was in that open source pack, but actually the material that I designed with this chair after I modeled this chair was for cycles, because all of the materials in the Alchemy base pack here are cycles materials. So I'm going to go ahead and press library to open my library up, and I could just scroll down here, but I'd rather take this time to display the sweet reality palettes feature here. And under fabric, select leather here. And as you can see, sometimes the little material icons take a minute to manifest, which is a little annoying, but you know, no big deal. Let's shift select all of the stuff we want to be leather. And I'm going to press use. So we can actually, if we switch this to material viewport, I'm going to use a Sensei Format / ZeroBrush feature called Quick Lights and just turn it on down here. And what this does is make the world background black. And it also adds this sweet lighting rig here, which stays invisible until you're actually doing a render preview or rendering. It's just some quick lighting to help you edit materials and see what's going on. Anyway, let's press Shift Z to get a render preview of that. Got a fine, nice, I was going to say Corinthian leather. I don't know what Corinthian leather is. I don't even know if that's the right usage of the word Corinthian. Anyway, here's some leather here in cycles. So if I want to get ZeroBrush to be able to paint some layers directly onto this, all I do is under the ZB options, make sure Alchemy paint is activated and select the object I want to paint on, then just press paint. I don't have to make a UV map. I don't have to do anything else. So right there, I could just begin painting on this thing if I wanted to. So, you know, whatever. Or I could add a bump layer and paint bump things. Because the material is so complex already, you can pretty much only see your bump strokes on top of your color layer. So that is until you actually do a render preview or go to render. Then you'll see that all the strokes are actually there. See, go ahead and shut that off there. That's just while you're in material viewport shading. If you go ahead and switch this to texture, of course, you can see, you know, what you're painting on too. We could load some sweet decal brushes in here. Click on my brushes folder, decals, and how about Sensei here? And load this guy up. And I'm painting this onto this bump layer. So if I were to then press my render preview button, we can now see that kind of engraved into the chair there as these samples kind of begin to fill in. But 2.5 is a pretty extreme bump level. Drop that down to 0.5. The default level is extreme, so the user is able to make sure they can see the results of what they're doing to begin with. And then comes modifying, tweaking. Okay, that looks a lot more now like it was like branded into there, like with a hot iron or something. So this really works for any type of material that you want to use. You're going to be able to use these image-based texture layers of bump, specular, glow on anything. So for instance, go ahead and press the object mode button, which will automatically save my generated paint layers, thanks to ZeroBrush. And let's add this wine glass here. I'm going to right click here so it will show up there when I press append. And close that up there. So I'm going to press W to increase smoothing on this thing because it looks like I had it left at a pretty low subdivision level. And so we could click on glass here, and I'll just select this like generic basic glass material. Go ahead and press use and add that glass there, and select this liquid in here. And the Alchemy base pack is basically real simple in terms of liquid selection. So, but the open source pack has some more sweet stuff in it. So I'll click on that and click liquid. Well, maybe not too much more. How about river water? Make your kids drink river water. Press use and close that off there. Shut that up. I don't need that. And go ahead and close my library. Don't really need that. Okay, so if I were to press Shift Z right now, well, this is looking pretty black. Let's add a floor. Shift A, mash out a plane, S to scale, G to grab. Or I don't know, maybe this is like a table. Tab, go into edit mode, E to extrude. There's a bevel over here. Shift W, do some loop cuts. Shift W, do some loop cuts here. And I'm going to press Shift D to do an inset. Select that. Press Shift R, which repeats my last thing. Select all these guys. Extrude them. Okay, got some kind of table here. Let's go ahead and click back on the Alchemy base pack library. I got some sweet, sweet wood materials. And select these wood planks dark. Press Use. If I switch this back to material viewport shading, you can see how that's going to look. That's way too small on there, so I'm gonna close my library up and press adjust and adjust the texture space of this thing to where it's doing more things like I want it to. And let's see, there we go. That'll probably work. Go ahead and press hide. And let's bring this cup up, this delicious cup of delicious river water. And go ahead and scale it down to where it's not crazy on that table. Alright, you can always see things a little bit better with context. So now let's try render preview, press Shift Z. And so we've got this wood planks material and this glass full of like gross green river water, which is nice. But the whole point of this was to show that we can paint these texture layers now with the Alchemy paint option in ZeroBrush directly onto any material type. So we could get out of that. We could, with this wine glass selected, we could press paint. And as soon as we do, I could jump back to this regular draw brush and paint onto this thing however. So if we press Shift Z, we can see that paint that I just put on there. Or if we were to say get rid of that because it's stupid and add a glow layer, which is basically emission. And I'm going to select this line tool here in ZeroBrush, which nicely informs me, hey, hold Alt to constrain the line. Yeah, I was already at 1. Use the ZeroBrush hardness slider, which gives us real fast, simple control of basically the brush curve without having to do all that. And so I could, on this glow layer we just added, I don't know, let's see, make it red. Yeah, we'll make it red. And with the line tool selected, you can hold Alt and do another one here. So we have got like these two glowing lines on this cup, which I wanted that to go all the way around, and I can do that if I just press the paint through button. So Control Z on that. Make sure paint through is on this time, and do that, and do that. Well, I should have probably aligned my view first, but I think you get the basics here. So if we press Shift Z, now we've got these sweet glowing strips coming off of our glass material, which is pretty dope. So if we can increase this strength to say 125, that should be sending off some mad glowingness. Or adjust the intensity there, change that to say 5. And you can see like it glowing onto, like, yeah, you can, it's like, it's getting all the way over there on the leather seat there. You can see it pushing off. But if I had some more objects around here, you'd see it, I guess, glowing a lot more. Oh, you know what? You'd see it a lot more if I turn down the quick lights. So I'm going to press this, which stops the render preview. And in Sensei Format, I've got a nice little scene brightness value, which will let me control globally the lights. And I'm going to bring it down real low, and then you'll just see the glow of those like lines we just added. Once I press render preview again, there we go. That's pretty cool. Anyway, so we could, you know, add a bump layer to this. I guess I could load this graphic I made for another. It was basically a promo for ZeroBrush, the last big release of ZeroBrush that never got used. I spent like a month making this huge, awesome, mad scientist thing that never got used. But anyway, this little icon's getting used now. And we could switch this to texture view because we won't really be able to see the bump layer. We won't really be able to see it now because it's black on black, which is not super useful. There's a way to do this. Okay. I'm going to turn its brightness up. There we go. And so this is actually on that bump layer. I'll just Control Z. Let's make that a bit bigger. There we go. That's pretty sweet. No doubt. Okay, let's press Shift Z and see what that looks like. Oh man, that's cool. The bump layer on that glass makes it look like it's engraved right into the glass. That's so sweet with those glowing lines. I tell you, like, I start building this stuff and I get an idea and I build a thing and I build a thing and then I forget what I built and then it just like starts coagulating into something new and crazy. I love Blender. I love creating these tools because they just start building on each other and the potential just gets crazier and crazier. I think I want to bring up my lights a little bit so I can see that a little bit better. Maybe turn that down, that wicked glow. And let's check this out. All right, pretty sweet. Well, I think we've killed enough time showing how Alchemy can now work with ZeroBrush. So no UV mapping, no pre-knowledge needed, no setup. Just click Paint. Just make sure this option is activated after you've purchased and installed Alchemy. And you can paint these awesome texture image layers on top of your crazy complicated node rig materials or Blender Render materials or whatever. Okay, so here's what happened, guys. All right, so I finished with the video about how you can use ZeroBrush with Alchemy. And then I decided, you know what, I'm gonna need a thumbnail for this. I better go back and, do something similar to the stuff going on in the video, render it out, and then I'll have a thumbnail. And I got to making things and I was, doing similar stuff. Like I made a table, but I put a little more modeling effort into it. I took a glass out. This, by the way, is a very crappy little 50% of 1920 by 1080, 100 sample render in really low light, so it's really firefly and bad. But anyway, so I made like a similar table, and then I brought the wine glass out that we were using, and I put the Pi Manor graphic on there on the bump layer, and I appended these chairs into the scene and all this stuff. And pretty quickly I realized, you know what, this is starting to look way cooler than anything I actually made in the tutorial. People are going to call BS on this if I use this as the YouTube thumbnail. So I thought I would break down everything I did real quickly to explain how I did all this. First thing I would like to say is 0 UV mapping was done for this scene. So this is all materials used from the Alchemy base pack and all the techniques used with ZeroBrush and Alchemy. So let's go over them real quickly. Some of them I can just sort of explain from this image, which is why I went ahead and rendered this crappy little image. But so this wall back here, this is just a cube stretched out to be a wall where I added the Bricks Raise AE material, which uses cycles true displacement and handles everything for you to make sure that adaptive subdivision modifiers and everything will properly render as soon as you use it. So what I did is I selected that wall, and then I just in ZeroBrush press the paintbrush button, of course making sure the Alchemy paint option is checkmarked, which actually I've turned this on permanently, which you can change any settings for an add-on and then check mark it and go to File, Save Startup File. Of course you want to do that with a new startup file so that you don't have a bunch of junk in your startup file, but I basically keep that on all the time now because it doesn't interfere with the regular functions of ZeroBrush. I press the texture paint button, and I'll actually click on the wall here now and go ahead and click on it. And so yeah, I just added this transparent PNG graphic I created to be positioned where the camera will see it basically. And I just loaded that image in. I created the image in Photoshop, a transparent PNG, and set this to load as decal. And I put it in my other folder with all my decal brushes and just loaded it in as a decal so I could stamp it onto wherever I wanted. Yeah, it's super awesome. The true displacement materials in combination with the ZeroBrush texture layers on top, what happens is, it looks like it's really painted onto that 3D generated mesh, which comes from the true displacement. So it looks like it's, like spray paint stenciled on there. It's really cool. And also, you can't really see because the quality, the render quality of this is real bad and the light is real low. But I made some coins, and all I did to make these coins was I made a cylinder. I'll actually go into the other layer here, another layer here where everything's not so bogged down. but I made a cylinder and I added a subdivision modifier and some smoothing by tapping W a few times in Sensei Format, and extruded this so I could make that flat, extruded that a few times so I could make that flat and not look weird, scaled her on down. Then basically I added a metal material from out of my library, and then I just used Zero Brush to press paint, and added a bump layer, and just loaded another decal brush of the Blender Sensei logo and just stamped it right on there. And to get them all scattered like that, all I did was press Shift D, which in Sensei Format adds an array modifier. And if you hold Alt Shift D after pressing Shift D, you can change which direction that the array modifier is going. So I wanted to stack up like that, so I press Alt Shift D until it's doing what I want to, basically. Just keep pressing it until it's going the direction you want. And once it's going the direction you want, you can press Shift D, which increases the count, the number of times the array is duplicating the object after the initial pressing of Shift D, which adds it. I just stacked them up a bunch. And then under physics, I turned on add active, which gives gravity and mass and bullet time stuff to your objects. And then I just press separate, which separated all of them. So I used add active on these, which means that they'll have collision and also have gravity. And then I used add passive on the table, which this isn't the table, but let's just pretend this cube is the table. I pressed add passive, which basically gives it collision too. It means it can affect stuff, but it's not going to have gravity. It's going to be locked into place. And then I just like tilted these slightly, and I'll scale this up a little bit more so they don't go everywhere. And then press play. And let these scatter about. You can actually pick them up live and, adjust them like that, like as the animation's playing there. And press pause. And I'll turn on my high def shading here for a second so we can see these better. Anyway, so I got something like that. And if you're going for an effect like this, after you press play, if you go back to the beginning, these will all be in the same location they were, which is not what I want. But what you can do to make that final is press apply transform. But I need to select them all and then shift. Just want to select those coins. Whoops, don't want that selected there. No, thank you. Then press apply transform. Now when we go back, these coins this is like their permanent like rotation in position. Like this is their normal thing now. So we could actually even remove physics from them and they'd be permanently changed like that. So I'll just go ahead and remove the physics for them, just so we can show like full circle, how to do it. And then now this is just how those will look. No matter what frame you're on, they're just stationary. So basically that's what I did for the coins. And haha, that looks awesome. Which all the high def shading mode is it turns on Blender's live 3D view ambient occlusion. And also in Sensei Format, it activates the default scene light. And if you're in cycles, it transfers you to Blender render so you can see these shadows and effects and things like this until you turn it off. And then it will take you back to whatever render engine you happen to be in, whether that was Blender render or cycles. The point is it just makes it easier to sometimes work in the 3D view. But man, look how cool this stuff looks. It's so old-timey. It kind of works for my whole setup with the cigarette and like old fancy leather chairs and stuff. Anyway, I don't need it right now, so I'm going to turn that off, which switches me back to cycles render. I'm going to switch back to the image editor here. The phone, I used a glossy plastic material that comes in the Alchemy base pack. And the screen is from this, actually both of them, the plastic glossy and the screen is from this screen glossy. If I turn on the preview of this, the material library preview, you can see it a bit closer. So we got this sweet glossy screen material. So basically I added that material to the screen of this real simple little phone I modeled. And then the plastic glossy to the body. And then I clicked on the actual screen itself and just pressed the ZeroBrush paint button and loaded another decal, which I made in Photoshop of this Blender Sensei style phone menu screen system. Actually, the layer I used in ZeroBrush was a glow layer. So if I click on this other menu layer, this is actually a group instance of the actual object. Actually, same as this cigarette. That's why you see in this other layer, I've got the two actual objects here. Why I like using group instances in my actual scene is that Okay, see how I've got this phone like tilted like this? I mean, well, that's great for setting up my scene, but what if I like had this phone all tilted, but then wanted to go back and edit something on it or do something to it? Like, it may be really awkward editing the mesh or the geometry like this. So what I like to do is, as I've mentioned before, I like using this little layer down here as kind of my backstage area, like my internal little library of stuff. What you can do is you can take any object, that you've been editing or working on, and I'm gonna close that up because that is slowing things down because it's so huge. Anyway, so think about something like this. So it could be one object, it could be two objects, whatever, but you can press Control G to turn that into a group. So if I come down here and I press View Groups, it says Cube Group because that's the thing I just made. What you can do is make something and have it, standard and easy to edit and, do stuff to in the future, and then just basically create an instance of it that you can fling around anywhere to set up your scene, which is a much nicer way of doing things. And in Blender, you can actually drag and drop these groups right out into the 3D view, sort of like Flash or other programs that have like libraries of stuff. You can just click, drag it out, there it is, and that is a group instance of this. So I could have this thing rotated or scaled, or I don't know, say I was trying to do some weird thing to it that would make it awkward if I wanted to like work on it later. And then I can always come back here and work on the actual core object of it, if I wanted to add something or change something. And it's not super awkward and horrible to try to fix, So we go back there, see, there it is. So that's why I like group instancing. You can also add instances by pressing Shift A, and here it says instances, select an instance, and that is the same thing as like dragging a copy from that group out there. Anyway, just wanted to quickly explain that, anything I can to help you figure out how to do stuff better. Where was I? Yeah, so basically I just added I clicked on the screen, clicked ZeroBrush Paint, added a glow layer, and turned on Load as Decal and loaded up this decal Sensei phone here, which looks really like pixelated when you're adjusting the brush, but not when you actually go to paint it down. Looks pretty nice. And just painted it right on top of that glossy screen material, which you can't really see that well in the image editor. If I switch this back to render result, you can't really see the quality of the screen, but it's there. And so especially if we were to like be zoomed up on the screen, it would have that super awesome, look to it with that phone image graphic, pasted right on top of it. Just looks really gnarly. So yeah, finally the cigarette. And the cigarette, I didn't use any base material. I just did that all in ZeroBrush. So you know how we were like drawing those glow lines across the glass earlier in this tutorial? Basically, I did that, but for a cylinder that I stretched out, very similar to the way I made the coins, just made it thinner and stretched it out longer for the cigarette. And press ZeroBrush, and then made one big line to paint the little filter part, and then another line. I added a glow layer to it, similar to the glow layer to the phone, and then painted a red or orangish color on the glow layer at the end of the cigarette. And so we get that really sweet result there. And go ahead and press this to finish painting and delete this thing because it's ridiculous. But anyway, back in the Real for Reals layer, I'll press Alt Z to go back to solid viewport shading. Anyway, for this ashtray here, I just use a glass material from the Alchemy base pack, and then what I did is I just used this sand material and I added it to an object and I changed its name, and I added a color filter to that sand and removed all its saturation with added Alchemy color filter, and then I added it back to the library and just called it ashes. So it's basically just sand. If I click on the object itself and click on ashes, you can see what I did was press this button, add color filter, renamed it to ashes, dropped the saturation all the way down to where it's just going to be looking like black and white sand, which looks a lot like ashes. And then I just press this to add it back to my library so I could use it to paint with. And then I just painted it onto the glass, and you can sort of see a little representation of it live in the 3D view here, but it looks a lot cooler when it renders. And then it just looks like there's ash inside of that. I think that about covers it. The last touch I wanted to add to this thing before I started, doing final tweaks and preparing to do a much better, higher sampled render was paint on some smoke to the end of that cigarette. So I hope you guys appreciate me dissecting this scene, because the examples I gave in the tutorial kind of sucked, to be honest. They didn't really demonstrate the full potentiality of Alchemy with ZeroBrush, so hopefully this part of it did. And so thanks for watching, and be sure to check out Alchemy. If you haven't already, you can download the manual to it for free. Or if you're interested in all the sweet menus and modeling techniques that I was using in this video, most of that is like special Sensei Format stuff, which Sensei Format's totally free. You can check that out by clicking the What's Up With Your UI link or whatever I named it somewhere over here. So thanks for watching, and see you next time.